the biggest risk that we labeled for 2012 is the end of the 9/11 era. And I said that because, I mean, it's very clear. Well, the 9/11 era is over, right? I mean, we're out of Iraq, the war is over. And we're leaving Afghanistan, troops are already gone, and we have a defined end date. It's not going to go well, but nonetheless. Bin Laden is dead, and many of the top operatives in al-Qaeda are, and it's been degraded very significantly. So if you wanted to point to a 9/11 era is over, 2012 is when it hits, bam, we're done. But what is happening instead is that everyone is focused about how governments are inside economic outcomes and need to get it right. And the markets hate that. I think the biggest concern out there is, despite the fact that the Eurozone isn't falling apart, despite the fact that gridlock in the United States is not an utter disaster, despite the fact that there is no Chinese hard landing, the fear in the markets is great. It's grave. And so people aren't going back into the euro. They're all waiting for someone else to. Money is staying on the sidelines. Big corporations have huge amounts of cash on their balance sheets, but they don't know where to go yet. Lots of cash. When do we make a move? Huge opportunities in Europe. But what if, even the slightest chance that it blows up, should we do that? This is the way that corporations and big CEOs are thinking right now. And I think that puts a pall on the entire macro environment. It makes everything more problematic. I'll go through the others just really, really briefly. I won't, just to give you a quick one. I talk about the G0 a lot, the fact that there's an absence of global leadership. It's very clear in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it used to be you had major financial crises, the peso crisis, the ruble crisis, right? The Asia crisis. One of the things they all had in common was the U.S. Treasury Department, was the fact that the United States came in some capacity. They put money on the table. They provided leadership. Geithner is more than happy to fly to Europe, but he's not signing any checks. And when the Europeans asked the Chinese, when the French asked the Chinese for support, the Chinese said, no, thank you. Right? It's a very different environment. And the same thing that's happening on that front is happening from a security perspective. Libya was 2011. 2012, we have Syria. We're going to see a lot more Syrias than Libyas. We're going to see a lot more places where the U.S. is not going to or capable of fixing it. And who is? Not the Chinese, not the Russians, not the Europeans, not the Japanese. That's not even funny, right? So instead, it's going to be lots of local folks. The Arab League isn't going to get it done. The G0 has more, it impacts everybody, but it impacts the Middle East in 2012 more than anywhere else. The lack of leadership, the lack of global intervention, for good or for bad, is making all of the conflicts that exist, they're exacerbating them. We're seeing this in Iraq. We will. We're seeing it. We will see it with the growth of governance in Libya and the transition. We're seeing it in Syria. We'll see it in Iran. We can talk about that. Across the Middle East. This is structural. This is a bad year for the Middle East. There is no question. 2012 is worse than 2011. Beyond that, I'd focus on things like North Korea, which will look relatively quiet, at least in the early days, but that transition is going to be very difficult to effect. The guy was not groomed for a long time. He's not going to be able to run the country without massive support around him. No guarantees that it'll happen in an easy way. And if it doesn't, then, well, things could blow up very easily. So that's a big risk as well. In Europe, there is a risk in Europe. It's not that the Eurozone falls apart. It's that the Eurozone doesn't come together quickly enough. In other words, there's muddle through. We're still going to be talking about European crisis. We're still going to be talking about the fact that the big bazooka from the Germans has not been fired through 2012, and that's going to upset a lot of folks in the markets. And there's some smaller risks as well. We talk about smaller in terms of their global impact, Pakistan, of course, and Afghanistan. We talk about China security issues, in particular, vis the United States in Asia, something we've just seen in the last 48 hours with the Philippines. And then some smaller issues like elections in Venezuela, populism in South Africa, and the like.